Was the outcome of last year's Synod on the Family manipulated? And how will it impact the October Synod? Vatican reporter for the National Catholic Register, Edward PENTIN, shares some blockbuster material from his new book in an exclusive. And later, what do Catholics really think about their faith? Catholic League President Bill DONOHUE is here to share his brand new survey. And finally, tens of millions of children have read her acclaimed Dork Diaries series. Author RENEE Russell shares her inspiring story and tells us how you can get your kids reading. The World Over Live begins right now.
Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. Edward PENTIN, Bill DONOHUE, and RENEE Russell are all straight ahead. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, or if you have a question, I'll be live tweeting throughout. Find me on Twitter at Raymond Arroyo, or you can email me at worldover@EWTN.com. Here's the brief. News from the world over this week. Pope Francis has announced some extraordinary changes for the upcoming Jubilee Year of Mercy. In a letter to Archbishop Rino Fisichella, the president of the Pontifical Council for the Promotion of the New Evangelization, the Holy Father said he is giving all priests for the year the authority to grant absolution to those who have been involved in abortions. Since abortion often includes automatic excommunication, under current canon law, abortion cases must involve diocesan bishops or priests delegated by the bishop. And in a gesture to the Society of St. Pius X, the Pope declared that clergy from the Breakaway Catholic group will be able to validly and licitly absolve sins during the Jubilee year. He added in the letter that he hopes solutions can be found in the near future to recover full communion with the priests and superiors of the society. The Pope also offered special indulgences to prisoners, the sick, and the elderly who cannot travel during the Jubilee year. They can watch a Mass on TV and receive the indulgence. There are some apparent canonical ambiguities that some church observers have raised. Among them, the Pope's letter appears to carry no canonical weight, as it is not a papal decree, a papal instruction, a motu proprio, or any other official papal document. The indulgences were simply explained in the letter. Some canonists are also asking if the Pope's letter alters the status of priests in the Society of St. Pius X and the faithful who currently seek absolution from them. We'll discuss all of this and more later in the show. And the Pope held a virtual audience with Americans ahead of his visit to the U.S. later this month. ABC News hosted the event, linking the Holy Father via satellite with the homeless, Mexican immigrants, students, and faithful from Chicago, Los Angeles, and McAllen, Texas, 3 cities he will not be visiting. The Pope said it is important for him to meet the citizens of the U.S., and at one point, Valerie Herrera, a high school senior, wept as she told Pope Francis she had turned to music for comfort because of the bullying she received due to a rare skin disorder. The Pope then asked her in English if she would sing for him. She was hesitant.
Be courageous.
Junto a ti, María, como niño quiero estar. Tómame en tus brazos, guíame en mi caminar.
Thank you very much. It's very kind of you.
ABC will air a full version of the Pope's virtual audience in an upcoming edition of 2020. And details of the Pope's U.S. visit continue to trickle out. Washington Cardinal Archbishop Donald Wuerl announced that the Pope's canonization Mass of Blessed Junipero Serra will be conducted entirely in Spanish. This is a recognition to the large Hispanic population in the U.S., according to the Cardinal, and he added, that the Pope speaking Spanish was appropriate, since this is the first Pope from the New World, and Spanish is the predominant language in the hemisphere. The Pope's address to Congress will be in English, according to the Cardinal. He added that the Pope will use that address to call for bipartisanship, offering a message that it's possible to work together. And the migration crisis in Europe continues to escalate on land and at sea. 4 men accused of involvement in the trafficking deaths of 71 people in Austria last week are being tried in a Hungarian court. And this heartbreaking photograph has shocked the collective conscience of Europeans and people around the world. This toddler was among many, mostly Syrian refugees, attempting to cross the Aegean Sea by boat from Turkey to Greece. Most are escaping the war-torn Middle East and northern Africa. Officials in Hungary have suspended rail travel in order to stem the tide of migrants seeking asylum in Germany. The move has led to mass protests and desperate acts by migrants. Other EU governments are coping with a flood of migration by toughening anti-human trafficking laws and dissuading migrants from making the dangerous trip unless they have well-founded claims of asylum. The German Bishops' Conference issued a statement acknowledging the tradition of giving sanctuary to refugees in churches. But they went on to say that sanctuary should only be granted as, quote, a last resort for the prevention of imminent human rights violations, end quote. And the leader of Philadelphia's Catholics waded into the immigration debate here in the U.S. on Tuesday. Archbishop Charles Chaput called Donald Trump's bid to end birthright citizenship, quote, a profoundly bad idea. He said Trump and others are playing on our worst fears and resentments. The debate on immigration, he said, has become ugly and bombastic. The Archbishop's criticism comes just weeks before Pope Francis arrives in the U.S., where immigration is expected to be a key part of the pontiff's message. Meanwhile, in the latest Monmouth poll, Trump's support is growing. He is now at 30% nationally. His nearest rival, Ben Carson, is at 18%. All the other candidates for the GOP nomination are in single digits. And ISIS jihadists released yet another graphic execution video this week. 4 men accused of being Shia spies are shown hog-tied in chains, hung upside down from a pole, and eventually burned alive. This video, we warn you, is difficult to watch. The prisoners, all dressed in orange jumpsuits, first confessed to their crimes on camera before meeting their fate. This latest ISIS video is believed to be in response to a similar graphic video released by Shia militants earlier in the week. It shows the execution of an ISIS fighter. Meanwhile, the prefect of the city of Rome has said that he sees a concrete and real threat of terrorist attacks during the Jubilee year. Franco Gabrielli, who is coordinating the city's planning for the Jubilee year, did not offer specifics, but he said that Rome will take security precautions to minimize the danger. Like all threats, he said, this one does not mean that we have to shut ourselves down. Back in the U.S., another shocking Planned Parenthood video was released this week by the Center for Medical Progress. The latest appears to show a business partner of Planned Parenthood unwittingly admitting to illegal activities. Advanced Bioscience Resources, Perring Larton, told the undercover investigator that her company operates a clinic for procuring fetal body parts in Minnesota. But Minnesota law explicitly forbids procuring, transferring, selling, or donating aborted body parts in any manner. Lawmakers there are calling on Democrat Governor Mark Dayton to investigate the matter. On Thursday, U.S. District Court Judge David Bunning jailed a county clerk in Kentucky over her refusal to issue same-sex marriage licenses. Earlier this week, the Supreme Court ruled against Rowan County Clerk Kim Davis, who was seeking relief from having to issue such licenses, citing her religious beliefs. Davis has not issued marriage licenses to any couples, gay or straight, since the U.S. Supreme Court same-sex marriage ruling came down in June. She says those seeking gay marriage licenses can get them from other Kentucky counties. And she was concerned about having her name printed on those licenses. And a federal judge on Monday sided with the organizers of the National March for Life in its challenge to the Obamacare contraceptive mandate. U.S. District Judge Richard Leon held that the March for Life could be exempt from the requirement, which includes sterilizations and abortion-causing drugs. Even though it is not a religious organization, it opposes abortion on ethical grounds rather than religious ones. So the ruling is significant. And Pope Francis's visit to New York will include Central Park. City officials announced that the Holy Father will take a short jaunt through New York's iconic park on September 25th. The Central Park pass-through would allow tens of thousands of people to see the Pope up close, according to city officials. You will need tickets, however. Any New York State resident can apply for the lottery, which will be held next week. Now, if you can't get tickets to Central Park or Washington, or if you're not going to be in Philly, be sure to tune in to EWTN. We'll be there with live, complete coverage of the entire papal visit, gavel to gavel. You'll really have the best seat in the house. Go to EWTN.com for details, and we'll be covering the Pope from the 19th when he lands in Cuba, straight through his departure from Philadelphia. Don't miss a moment of the visit. When we return, was the Synod on the Family rigged? The National Catholic Register's Vatican correspondent, Edward Pentin, has written a provocative new book asking that very question. He joins us exclusively when The World Over Live continues. You don't want to miss this.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. Last October, cardinals from around the world gathered for the Synod on the Family in Rome. The Pope wanted them to discuss the pastoral challenges the Church faces in ministering to the family. The subjects that got most of the press attention were communion for divorced and remarried Catholics, the pastoral care of gays, as well as how the Church might treat same-sex relationships. Some saw the discussions as a much-needed breath of fresh air. Others decried what they saw as an effort to alter Church teaching on marriage and the family. Now a new book chronicles the backstage moves that shaped the Synod and poses a provocative question. Was the outcome of the Synod preordained? It's called The Rigging of a Vatican Synod, an investigation into alleged manipulation at the Extraordinary Synod on the Family. It's a new ebook from Ignatius Press. Joining us in studio is author and Vatican correspondent for the National Catholic Register, Edward Pentin. Delighted to have you here.
Good to be here. Thanks.
Hey, I want to start with, why did you want to write this book? I mean, you covered every movement of this while it was happening. Why write a book about it?
Well, I think there were some unanswered questions during the Synod, and I think people heard about this allegation of rigging going on or manipulation. And so I thought, well, as a journalist, I have to find out what the truth is, and if there's something unjust, then that needs to be uncovered. So I thought, well, I need to look into this in more detail. So I thought, over the past year or so, I've been looking at what happened in more detail, and that sort of ended up with this book. But as I say, it's important that the title has a question mark at the end, because I want the reader really to decide, to look at the evidence and let them decide, was this rigged? Was there manipulation going on? Was there an agenda being pushed? And really allow them to make up their own mind from the evidence.
Cardinal Napier, the African cardinal of great repute, at one point he is told by a Synod official, and I'm quoting here, "This thing is being manipulated. It's being engineered. They want a certain result." Who are they?
They are, it turned out from my investigations, there was probably about 7 or 8 people involved in that, and they came from the top of the organization of the Synod Secretariat. So I think those 7 or 8 people were keen to see a certain result. They wanted to see their agenda pushed through, and it was them really.
Cardinal Baldessari and
Yep.
some of the other, Forte, Archbishop Forte, these are the people who were really
That's right.
instrumental.
Cardinal Baldessari, who's the General Secretary of the Synod of Bishops, appointed by Pope Francis, and also Archbishop Forte, who's the Special Secretary. They seemed to be pushing a certain thing, a certain agenda, which was obviously what people didn't like, was contrary to what they thought was church teaching and established church.
I want to back up a little bit. I want to talk about Cardinal Walter Casper's controversial speech in the February preceding the Extraordinary Synod, where he put forward this notion that divorced and remarried Catholics should be allowed some penitential process that was not an annulment, that didn't take so long. What was at the heart of that proposal, and does that campaign go on? The last time I interviewed Cardinal Walter Casper, it appeared as if he was backing away, but is he?
I don't know if he is, but I think he doesn't feel perhaps that he's as supported as he was at the beginning of the process, and I think he's standing back a little bit to see if things will just move on their own momentum, I think. But yes, that proposal was very controversial, as many viewers will know, that it was many saw it as an attack on the Eucharist, and some say it was like a three-pronged attack, not only on the Eucharist but also confession and marriage itself. So that was the great concern. I put in the book in chapter 2 a whole chapter devoted to what's at stake at the Synod, so the reader can get an idea of just why the people were so
why all of
passionate
this is
about
important,
it. Yeah.
And the forthcoming synod, which will really decide everything.
Exactly.
And we're going to talk about that in a moment. You suggest in the book that this is all a Trojan horse.
Yes, this is one view, that the divorce and remarriage issue was being used by certain people within the Synod to push through another agenda.
And what was that other agenda?
That other agenda basically centers on validating same-sex unions within the Church, changing the Church's views on human sexuality, the Church's doctrine in a sense, or the Church's pastoral practice, which in turn they argue affects doctrine. So loosening the teaching on cohabitation, for example, and so forth.
It was that interim report, the report that sort of coalesced and gathered all the interventions and the conversations throughout the first half of this process. They issue this interim report. That is what caused so many fireworks.
Yes.
Because it was released to the public, to the press, before the cardinals even got a glimpse of it. Tell me how that came to be. And many cardinals said, this bears no relation to the conversations we've been having. In fact, nobody even talked about homosexuality or communion for divorced and remarried people. We barely had a conversation about that.
Yes, I mean, this is what really alerted people to the fact that they thought there was some sort of rigging going on, because they said, you know, we didn't hear about these things discussed during the first week, and suddenly they were front and center, and they were put out to the press before they even heard them, before they'd even seen the report themselves. So they argue that there was that was being pushed through. But also, I mean, against that, people say, well, there were so many interventions, it was very difficult to put them together in such a short time.
Right.
So they had to sort of prepare this document even before the synod began.
So you believe it was prepared in advance, before?
Well, this is the argument, yes, that or at least certain aspects of it were prepared perhaps before the discussions began in that first week. So that's, yeah, I mean, you could look at it from both sides.
Well, you mentioned this in the book, and I've spoken to some people who say, wait a minute, these were written, every synod father submitted a written intervention, which was handed in before the synod started, and it was those written interventions that they based the midterm report on. Valid?
That is possible, yes, but the interim report is supposed to be, it's called the report on the discussions held at the first week of the synod. So if that's not the case, then it's a misrepresentation of that.
Tell me about how critical you reported throughout this synod. You had incredible reports, but in the middle, you interviewed Cardinal Casper, who was coming out of the meetings for the day. And he said something about the African cardinals, that the Africans shouldn't be listened to on marriage and other things. It's taboo to them, and they're going to hold us back. That was a major turning point, was it not?
Yes, I mean, people have said that it woke people up to the fact that there were certain things that were at play which they hadn't realized, and that there was this party, Cardinal Casper's alliances, if you
Right.
like, who weren't prepared to listen to what the Africans said, for example, on same-sex marriage and same-sex unions. And so that was quite a turning point, I think, yes. But
Well, it woke up and galvanized all of the African
Yes.
cardinals.
well, they realized that, they weren't going to be quiet, and they weren't going to be silenced by those running the synod. And they realized that they needed to speak up. So yes, it did galvanize them.
There's another thing you report for the first time. I've seen it in print anyway. This was all new to me, but I don't think this has appeared anywhere. And you write of a flare-up during the final report. So the synod's done, the conversations have taken place, and there are those drafting the final report. Cardinal Napier is one of those
Yes.
people. Cardinal Wuerl, Donald Wuerl of Washington is one of those people. What happened in that final draft?
Yes, well, Cardinal Napier wanted they were going to put the same-sex union issue, same-sex relationship issue together with the marriage, under the marriage section. And Cardinal Napier, of course, didn't like that because, same-sex unions aren't marriage in church teaching. So he asked that those be separated. But he said that they basically gave him the cold shoulder. They didn't listen to him because he was speaking in English, but they didn't want to seem to take any notice. And Cardinal Wuerl allegedly stepped in, this is what I've heard, and was very angry about this and said, listen to Cardinal Napier, listen to what he's saying, don't ignore him. He's on the committee, he has every right to make his views known. And apparently that got very heated, that moment. But there are other things too I put in the book about the final document and how it was kind of engineered in a certain way. And also, I think the group Voice of the Family, which is made up of pro-life groups, made the point that the documents of the Synod are trying to be faithful to two elements of authority, that the signs of God and the signs of human history. And they argue that you can't really do that because it'll bring a clash between the two. And in the end, the clash will weaken natural law. The natural law will no longer be seen as immutable. So this is a very important point, I think, that they bring up, that runs through the documents of the Synod.
Before we run out of time, the final document comes out. Now, this final document is the governing document for the Synod that we will see convene in October.
Yes.
The cardinals went through paragraph by paragraph. They voted on what would be included and what wouldn't. But at the end of the day, it was all included. And there are mentions in the final document of same-sex unions, cohabitation, communion for divorced and remarried people. Now, all of those paragraphs failed, but they were included. It was the Pope. It was Pope Francis who said, print them all.
Yeah.
He's the Pope. He can do that.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. And this is, again, people saw this as trying to push through an agenda. I mean, we don't know if the Pope really wants this or whether he just wants these threshed out properly and fully and
And have a full debate and discussion.
Yes, but this usually when they don't receive the consensus votes, these things are rejected. So if they don't receive, these didn't receive the 2/3 vote, so they should have been essentially rejected. Yeah.
What does all of this tell us about the Synod that will meet in October? Does this tell us anything about the dynamics at play? Is there an African firewall, if you will? It seems the Africans are very outspoken these days.
Yes, and I think in this next Synod they're going to be more vocal than in the last one because they can see the general direction, and I don't think they like it, and I think they're going to make their voices heard in a way that wasn't the case in the last time. But I think, I mean, I'm quite positive about it. I think
You're quite positive?
Well, in the sense that I think the kind of these allegations of rigging, I think, were very clear. People saw them. I think people are going to be alert to them more this time. If there is an agenda being pushed which goes contrary to the Church's established teaching, I think they're going to be aware of that. And also, I think we're coming from a different angle here. The first Synod was talking about the problems facing marriage and the family, so that the starting point was different. This is talking about the solutions, and as we know, the solutions are all there in the Church's doctrine. So it's going to probably start with doctrine this time, which is what the critics say should have happened last time. It'd start with doctrine and not with the problem.
Tell me about the way this linamenta, this final document and the introductory document, the working document for the Synod to come, the form of it, how will that dictate the process and the discussion at issue here when October rolls around?
Well, this is interesting because I think, from what I hear, is that the Synod is going to be take part in 3 parts. And I think the third part at the end of the synod is going to be about the more controversial questions.
So the last week.
The last week in the Instrumentum Laboris. Now some are saying this is another aspect, another way to try and push through the agenda. As time is running out, then they're going to talk about these issues and just
So
basically
cohabitation, gay marriage,
push them through
communion
quickly.
for divorced and remarried, that will all be in the final week.
That's right.
But
yes.
the first 2 weeks are general family
Issues, yeah. So there is the argument that as time runs out, these things are kind of ramrodded through. Whether that happens, I don't know, but this is one concern.
Now, I remember Cardinal Pell, and you report this in the book, Cardinal George Pell, demands the publication of those small working groups, that they be recorded and faithfully reported and released to the press.
Yes.
At that point, they wanted everybody to know, hey, these are the real conversations we're having.
Yes.
Do you imagine, consistent with Cardinal Baldessari's original vision for the last synod, that the new synod, the next one that convenes, will be totally private? The discussions will be private, or do you think they'll be made public?
I think they could be made public. I think there'll be more openness this time, and I think a greater sense of fairness. I think that is the hope, at least. Whether that happens, I don't know. But I think if they take the lessons from what happened last time, I think that will happen, because there was, as we know, there was a lot of controversy last time.
Who did you write this book for?
I wrote it really for the average, just the average Catholic reader who'd heard about this and was concerned about it and wanted to know really what went on behind the scenes and to know what's at stake, why there is this passion about it, why these things are so important. And that's why I think the good can come from this. I think it can be a catechetical moment for a lot of Catholics to find out why the Church teaches this and why people are so concerned about these things.
Edward Pentin, thank you for being here. It really is an inside account from really all angles. It was a fascinating read. I was familiar with some of it, but not all of it. You really synthesize it in a great way. Edward Pentin, thanks for being here.
Thank you very much.
Cardinal Napier, incidentally, who's endorsed the book, writes, it's an absolutely fascinating account of the Synod 2014, especially the machinations surrounding it. The rigging of a Vatican Synod, an investigation into alleged manipulation at the Extraordinary Synod on the Family. The new ebook by Edward Pentin is available online now from Ignatius Press on Amazon.com and at Ignatius.com. Coming up, what do Catholics really think about their faith? Catholic League President Bill DONOHUE drops by to talk about the League's new survey on that very subject. And later, Dork Diaries author RENEE Russell. The World Over Live returns in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back. My next guest is the president of the Catholic League. Tonight he dons his sociologist hat to help us unpack the results of a new survey he and the League have commissioned. It measures Catholic attitudes and beliefs before the papal visit. Here to tell us what he found, please welcome via satellite from Manhattan, Dr. Bill DONOHUE. Bill, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Raymond. Thank you for having me.
What was the most surprising thing, if you stand back and look at this survey? What surprised you the most as you read through the data?
Well, I think certainly the most important thing, and it may be surprising to some people, and that is how loyal practicing Catholics are. And even Catholics who are non-practicing pretty much agree with the Church on so many different important issues, and certainly Jesus and the resurrection mean a great deal to them. And Catholics regard their religion as a significant aspect. About 90% or more believe that their teachings and the Catholic Church means so much to them in their daily lives that I think that's a lot rosier picture than is often provided by the media.
Bill, I want to show you, put up for the audience and for you, some of these findings. Now, this is a Pew poll. In it, it found that 46% of Catholics say the Church should recognize the marriages of gay and lesbian people. In your survey, 58% support the traditional teaching of the Church vis-a-vis marriage. Why that discrepancy? What's happening there?
I think a lot of times it has to do with the wording. I mean, just take the question of, if the question is posed, is gay marriage the equal of cohabitation and marriage between a man and a woman? That's one thing. Another thing is, are you okay with or do you disapprove of same-sex marriage? Some of that gets teased into there as well. A lot of it's the wording. I know if you were to ask about abortion and you emphasize, should a woman have the right to do what she wants with her own body, you get one answer. If you ask, does a woman have a right to take the life of another person inside of her own body, or you talk about, are there double rights there, another person's right, you get a different kind of response. I think that the problem I had with the Pew survey was not its methodological precision. They do excellent work. I'm just wondering why it's okay to talk about practicing and non-practicing Catholics. We do that ourselves in our survey.
Right.
But why do you bring in cultural Catholics? Why do you bring in ex-Catholics? Why do you bring in people who say, well, I'm connected to Catholics? I mean, why the elasticity in this term Catholic to encompass almost everything? We don't do that with any other segment of the population. So it's kind of curious poll.
Bill, you also looked in your survey into women priests. What were the findings, and doesn't it show that these people, Catholic people, are somewhat conflicted on these issues?
It does, and let me address that because I get this, I talked to a reporter about this yesterday. If you say to Catholics, you say to anybody, non-Catholics, are you okay with so-and-so? Catholics and non-Catholics alike, they don't want to be perceived as being too judgmental. Now, there's a profound difference between saying, would you be okay if the Catholic Church had women priests? Most Catholics will say, yeah, I'm okay with it. In other words, I'm not going to lose my religion as a result of it. Now, let me tell you something. There's a huge difference between a preference and a demand. How many Catholics are demanding that the church ordain women? Almost none. And what's the evidence for that? Well, they would have bolted a long time ago, wouldn't they? It would have joined the mainline Protestant denominations because they have women priests. They're not exactly doing too well, by the way. Those numbers are going south there. Yeah. In other words, to say, yeah, are you okay with women priests? Are you okay with this or that? That's one thing. To say that you are suffering angst, that you're going to get involved in a petition, that you're demanding this, that the church is teetering unless they give in to these teachings. See, this is the way the media will willfully distort it. We found that only 35% of Catholics said that they felt strongly that women should be priests. That means 2 out of 3 Catholics are either okay with women not being priests, or it doesn't mean that much to them. Now, about in terms of being conflicted, yes, I had a hand in writing that question 20 years ago, and again in this poll here, lots of people are conflicted about lots of things. Those same people who say, are you okay with women priests, 58%, are among the 52% who say, I think the Catholic Church should stick to its founding principles and teachings and not try to keep up with the customs of today. So there's a certain kind of tension there. Okay, maybe woman priest, that's okay. But as far as I'm concerned, one of the things I like about my religion is it doesn't change with the cultural winds. So is there a conflict there? There is. But you know what? That's what we try to get to in our poll, to show the nuance, which sometimes is missing from other surveys.
There is an interesting thing in the Catholic League poll. You found overall the Pope Francis, enjoys an 83% job approval rating among Catholics, which is darn good. Any politician would kill for that. However, the Gallup poll indicated that his approval might be slipping. Overall, 76% to 59%, and among Catholics from 89% to 71%. To what do you attribute that decline, Bill, in the Pope's popularity?
I would say that, one of the nice things about the Pope is that he's a man of authenticity and he's courageous and he's breaking new grounds. But that's a double-edged sword, isn't it? Because now you go into uncharted waters from time to time, and you create a sense of uncertainty. And I think there's not only a sense of uncertainty with the Pope, but I think there's also a question of how micro are you going to get? Take the environment. Pope Benedict XVI, Pope John Paul II, all the popes before them, they talk about Catholics, Christians in general, have to be God's stewards. We have a moral obligation to care for the environment. But when you get into the weeds, when you get very micro-analyzing, and you begin to get into fossil fuels and air conditioning and things of that nature, I think a number of people are saying, wait a minute, now that's a little bit outside the domain. Same thing with income inequality and the like. I think some people say, sure, income inequality is a fact of life in every society. Some of it's just, some of it's unjust. And when you begin to take the model of the economy in Latin America and you use that as prototypical of a market economy, a lot of people, certainly myself included, would say, no, that's a false comparison. Because what you have in Latin America is basically crony capitalism, which is state-directed, which is fundamentally different from a market economy. So I think there have been some stumbling here. I'm sure that the Pope's motives are beyond rebuke, but the question is, I think some people are beginning to look askance when you get into some of these uncharted waters with that level of specificity.
There's an interesting fact that you all gleaned from your survey. It found that 1/3 of respondents, 1/3, say Pope Francis's views on climate change and income inequality carry more weight than those on abortion and marriage. Did that surprise you? A full third?
Well, don't forget, that's the aggregate. That's blending practicing with non-practicing. And one thing we find out in our poll, which is true of all polls, and it's certainly true in the Pew survey, mass attendance as an indicator of a practicing Catholic. People who attend Mass regularly who are practicing Catholics, they are not in rebellion against the Church's teachings. It's the ones who are non-practicing. So when you conflate the non-practicing together, I mean, and that raises a serious question. If your Catholic identity, it basically is an example of what is explained by your attendance at Easter and Christmas Mass and occasional prayer, to what extent can they be considered bona fide Catholics when you compare them to practicing Catholics? So again, you really have to disaggregate that. That's where you'd see the difference. And by the way, every time we take a look at the non-practicing versus the practicing, there's a huge difference. The non-practicing Catholics have more in common with secularists than they do with their own fellow Catholics who attend Mass regularly.
Bill, I want to get your reaction to a few stories here. I've got to throw these at you before I let you go. What do you make of Vice President Joe Biden, who himself may be considering a presidential run? He said this week, Pope Francis has become a moral rudder for the world on some of the most important issues of our time, from inequality to climate change. Do you think the administration may be attempting to use the Pope politically during his visit here?
Let me answer that definitively. The answer is unquestionably yes. And let me just take it beyond that. 84 Democrats, led by Rosa DeLauro, a Catholic, non-practicing, I would think, in many respects, out of Connecticut. This woman, who's been in rebellion against the bishops, who have led the fight against the bishops, she has got 84 people, not all of whom are Catholic, by the way, which I find striking, lobbying the Pope now on what he has to say when he gets to Washington. And they're not talking about the poor. Right. They're getting very specific. They want him to address minimum wage and the like. Now, every one of these people are rabid pro-abortion Catholics and non-Catholics. Since when did they exercise such tremendous fidelity to the Church's teachings? I mean, the selectiveness and the hypocrisy of these people, these 84 Democrats, which we will address in the Catholic League tomorrow, is mind-boggling. When it comes to euthanasia, when it comes to embryonic stem cell research, when it comes to abortion, when it comes to marriage, these central issues of our day, they're all on the other side. They reject the Catholic Church, and in the case of DeLauro, have led the rebellion against the bishops. So I guess these people, the only word I can use that comes to mind is that they are utterly shameless.
Before I let you go, your reaction to this clerk in Kentucky who refused to issue marriage licenses of any kind since the Supreme Court decision was handed down on gay marriage. She has now been jailed by the court. Was the court right? Should this woman have just followed her job description and signed off on these things, regardless of her moral concerns with it or religious oppositions?
Well, the authorities have an obligation, a legal obligation, to enforce the law. That is the law. On the other hand, she was right to do what she did. In other words, she's protesting, saying that I have a First Amendment freedom of conscience right, and I'm not going to cooperate with you. Now, I understand the authorities. They can't just be in rebellion against the Supreme Court justices here. What I want to know is, why are there so many Catholic priests as well, and others now, who are not taking the position of this woman who's invoking conscience rights? You know, I served during the Vietnam War period, and I remember back then when they questioned this in the Supreme Court, you know, do you have to have religious convictions in order not to serve? And the answer was no. They could be morally grounded. They could be non-sectarian. If that's the case when it comes to the draft, and that's okay with me, why is it that a practicing Christian now is not getting the support that she deserves from practicing Christians in this country? I find it immoral.
Bill Donahue, thanks for always weighing in, and for the survey. We will be in touch with you in the days ahead. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Raymond. Thank you.
You can check out the survey and much more by visiting CatholicLeague.org. Coming up, she's one of the world's most successful children's authors, creator of the much-beloved Dork Diaries series. Rachel RENEE RUSSELL joins us to discuss the importance of storytelling, literacy, and much more. The World Over Live returns in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
With school just starting, your kids are probably coming home with reading lists even as we speak. My next guest is a former attorney who found her true calling as a children's book author. She's written the hugely successful Dork Diaries series, with the 10th installment due out in October. Here to discuss her work, as well as the importance of great storytelling and how to inspire your kids to read, please help me welcome Rachel RENEE RUSSELL. So great to have you here. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
I want to start with this is such an incredible story, your personal story. You were at Northwestern University.
That is correct.
And you decide you're going to study writing. You've always wanted to do this, and there's a great children's author teaching, and he tells you what?
He tells me that he hopes that I have a backup profession because my manuscript that I submitted was not very good. So.
Oh my God. And then you decide
I decided,
the law.
Yes, I decided to become an attorney, and then I ended up practicing law for 20 years.
And didn't try to write at any point in between?
No, well, I would do it just for fun and for family, but definitely not as a career. I figured, I didn't have the talent, so.
And then at some point, your marriage of 25 years, your husband leaves you.
Yes, after 25 years of marriage, it was over, and I was left financially devastated. And I thought, what am I going to do? What am I going to do?
And you have a cancer scare in the midst of this?
Yes, I had a cancer scare, and it was just horrible, horrible, horrible. And I had to do something to kind of keep myself going. So I thought, I had always dreamed of writing a children's book. So I thought, well, let me sit down. And that's when I seriously put my heart into trying again.
Now, Rachel, how do you do that when you're in the midst of that kind of suffering? For some people, it's, they just want to kind of cocoon up and never come out. Where did you find the energy, the initiative to go to the table and face that blank page? Or was it a retreat for you? Was it therapeutic for you?
It was definitely therapeutic. I was also desperately in financial straits. And I thought, well, if I could help to launch this book, that would be an additional income for my daughters and I. And by it being a humor type book, it was very, very therapeutic as well.
Wow.
So I enjoyed writing it.
And I mean, 20 million copies in print, probably more now.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, it has become a global phenomenon. What I love about this is, and we should tell people a little bit about your lead character, about Nikki Maxwell, and your daughters and their collaboration with you. To start with Nikki Maxwell, where did she come from?
Nikki Maxwell is a combination of my two daughters.
Oh.
Growing up, my daughters were bullied a bit, and they were kind of outsiders. They studied really hard. They enjoyed school, and when the teacher asked a question, they'd raise their hands. And some of the kids in the classroom didn't take to that, so they were kind of teased a little bit and bullied. So having to deal with that as a mom, and it worried me because the first thing you feel like was, what's wrong with my kids? And then you think, well, what's wrong with me as a parent? And why are my children having this problem? So I was able to take all of that, good, bad, and ugly, and put it into Dork Diaries and add some humor and children all over the world have been able to relate to it.
No, it's really resonated. I mean, my own daughter has read, it was one of the first series she sort of took to, and on her own initiative read from top to bottom and then wanted the next one.
Yes,
so, I
very
mean,
good.
it's accessible because you've got the pictures, and yet there's this humorous, ongoing back and forth. The other characters come in. Tell me about the collaboration. Nikki, your daughter, is your illustrator.
Yes, Nikki, my younger daughter, and she's the namesake of the main character as well. She's my illustrator, and then my older daughter, Erin, is the co-author. So the three of us, work together.
But it's really a family affair.
Most
I mean,
definitely.
your brother is involved. Your
Yes.
sister booked this interview.
Exactly.
A producer
Yes,
said.
my sister's my manager. My brother's my office manager. My mom handles fan letters, and then my two daughters write with me.
Wow.
So definitely, we call ourselves Team Dork.
Team Dork.
Team
and I hear
Dork.
there's a reality show coming out. Or
Yes,
do a
we're
reality
in
show.
talks with Discovery Channel
Wow.
regarding that.
Team Dork is going to hit the big time
Yes.
again.
Yes.
Tell me about the misadventures of Max Crumbly, which is your next series, pitched to boys?
Yes, we had such a wonderful response with Dork Diaries, with girls and boys, but I wanted to try a boy main character. So The Misadventures of Max Crumbly will be released in April of 2016, and we have a boy main character. So.
Wow. That's going to be a whole new
Yes, exactly.
world for
I'm
you.
very, very excited about it as well.
I am launching a new literacy initiative this fall called Storyented, and the idea is that stories orient our lives,
Most
and
definitely.
if you find your story, you can find your way. I want to ask you a few questions that I ask every author that comes on here.
Okay.
Your favorite children's book is what?
My favorite children's book is Harriet the Spy by Louise Fitzhugh. And the reason why I love it is because, number one, it's a diary, and I think that was my inspiration, like, 40-something odd years later.
You
when
read
I
it as
sat
a
down.
child?
Oh, yeah, I read it as a child, and I loved it. And like Nikki Maxwell, she was a little ostracized, and she kept a diary, and one day she lost it, and other children found it, and they were not happy with some of the
they
things.
were kind of, they were, and not too kind to her, as I
And
recall.
then back in those days, I kind of felt a little ostracized, with some of the classmates and that too. So I love that book, and I'd even say today it's part of the inspiration for Dork Diaries as well.
What is your least favorite book?
My least favorite book?
Be honest.
As a child, I was really picky about the books I read, so I have to admit, as a young child, I really never came across a book I didn't like. Until high school, I struggled through War and Peace. So I would say War
We
and
all
Peace.
struggled through War and
Yes,
Peace. It's that
yes,
big.
Yes.
Tell me, was there a story that helped storient your life, where you gleaned a life lesson that you carry with you today? And what was it?
Again, I would probably go back to Harriet the Spy
Really?
and that, and probably the Diary of Anne Frank. You can see the
Oh, the
diary
diary
here.
motif.
Yes, exactly,
Yep.
exactly. And I think I loved that the authors were able to immerse themselves in the writing, and you just couldn't get into their heads. So I think as an author, that was probably the most inspiring thing for me.
Where do you write and why? Why do you write
Pretty much in my office, only because I have a comfortable chair and a big desk and the computer and all of that.
there? And you do it every day?
Every day, yes. I
This
write
is the
every day.
job. I
This
show
is
up
my
at 9,
full-time
I leave
job,
at, you
exactly.
told me 50 hours
Yes,
a week?
I
you spend writing?
probably, some evenings I may write till 11 o'clock midnight, So.
And how long does it take you to write one book
one
in the
Dork
series?
Diaries book would be about 5 months, 6 months.
Wow. And that's not, does that count editing the whole thing or no?
Yeah, that's everything.
That's everything.
That's everything. And we do 2 a year, so you can imagine what our schedule is like.
Wow. So that's why you really can't travel all that much to
Yeah,
promote because
that is very
you're writing
true.
all the time.
Very true.
If you could choose one writer as a mentor, past or present, who would it be?
Again, I would probably say Meg Cabot, again, author of Princess Diaries. I love humor, so I would probably say her.
Where do your best ideas come from? I mean, this series, much of it, you told me earlier, is based a little on your own experience and then on the audience, the experiences of your daughters.
Yeah, a lot of, I would say, is probably based on the experiences my daughters had in middle school and high school. So I was able to take the good, bad, and ugly and some of the experiences that they, that impacted them greatly and put it in the book. And then, of course, mix a little humor in there because, we don't want it to be traumatic, but.
Did faith play a role at all in
Oh,
your getting
most definitely. Oh,
that,
yes.
that terrible period, but then as you write these books?
Yes, yes, it did, because at one point I'm like, oh, why me, because, I was faithful and went to church and all that, and it's just like my life, the bottom fell out of my life, and I just couldn't figure out why. But there was a bigger plan for me, and, it was one thing to practice law in my hometown. Now I'm reaching, children all over the
Millions of
world and
children.
inspiring them, and, so I think it was sad to go through, but ultimately a lot of good came out of it.
Yeah,
So,
and that God was sort of preparing you for
most
this,
definitely.
through this dark period.
most definitely.
And I mean, you've done such an amazing work. What advice would you give parents who are having difficulty getting their kids to read?
I would say to find something that the child can relate to, that's fun, or if it's based on a hobby or something they're passionate about. And once they find that, you will find them under the covers with a flashlight reading and reading and reading and reading. So it's just a matter of finding that special
What do you
book.
hear from the girls and boys who come up to you during these school visits? I mean, I've read reports on these. I mean, these are like, it's practically like they're chasing you down the street.
Oh,
I mean, they
goodness.
want a hug, they want a selfie, they want you
Yeah.
to sign everything they own. What do they tell you?
Mostly that they love the books. The books makes them really happy. That a lot of the experiences that Nikki Maxwell has had, they've lived through those too. There's a mean girl. Sometimes their parents
Mackenzie.
don't quite understand them. There's too much homework. So most of the time I'm told that the books are their lives, and that they just relate to them, and that they're hilarious. So.
If you could write anything else, what would it be?
I'd like to tackle a fantasy, I think.
Really?
Yes.
Like what?
Probably where a character goes into another world, or there's magic involved, or just because I'm writing realistic fiction now, so that would just be very, very different.
You are, but it's really fun,
Yes.
realistic fiction. Now, a lot of people thought that this was inspired by The Diary of a Wimpy Kid. You said no, it wasn't.
No, it was inspired by my two children. However, I did realize there was a Diary of a Wimpy Kid. So
You realized there was a market, but this was
Yes.
kind of happening just. This released not long after. Diary of
within,
a
I think,
Wimpy
within
Kid,
a
right?
year.
Yeah.
Yes, within a year.
So it was it's very interesting because it's sort of
Yes.
one for really
Exactly.
was for boys and the others
Exactly.
for girls. So
Yes.
fascinating. Thank you so much for being
Thank
here and for
you.
your wonderful work.
Thank you.
Dork Diaries, the latest number 10, Tales of a Not So Perfect Pet Sitter, will be available at bookstores and online everywhere October 20th. Rachel, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
and
Thank you for
taking the
having
time.
me.
Now, that is all the time we have for now. Until next week, the show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter. The links are at RaymondArroyo.com. If you'd like me to visit your group or school, who knows, Rachel might come with me if I can guilt her into coming, or to your store during my Will Wilder and the Relic of Perilous Falls book tour this March, email me at Raymond@RaymondArroyo.com. Put Will Wilder in the subject line and send me your contact info. You can also pre-order the book now at the EWTN catalog, Amazon, at all the other retailers. Don't miss next week. The Archbishop of St. Andrews and Edinburgh, Leo Cushley, will be here from Scotland, and we've got much more. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thanks for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. We'll see you next time. Bye now. I'm going to go read my Dork Diaries.